Keanu Reeves walked into his own company and was told to sit in the corner like a beggar waiting for spare change. The receptionist didn't even look up properly when she dismissed him. The executives on the 12th floor were laughing, drinking expensive whiskey at 10 in the morning, completely unaware that the man in the worn motorcycle jacket owned 51% of everything around them. They saw his faded jeans and scuffed boots and decided he was nobody worth acknowledging. 14 minutes later, Keanu stepped into that boardroom. He didn't come to negotiate. He came to end careers. But what he discovered next was far worse than disrespect. They weren't just arrogant. They were planning to destroy everything he had built and abandon 847 employees to unemployment. What most people didn't know about Keanu Reeves was that beyond his acting career, he had quietly built something significant. 8 years ago, he had co-founded Starlight Entertainment, an independent film studio in Los Angeles dedicated to telling meaningful stories. He owned 51% of the company, making him the majority shareholder. But unlike most investors who demanded constant attention, Keanu had chosen to remain invisible. In all official documents, he was listed simply as K.R. Most employees had never met him, or even seen his face in connection with the company. For 8 years, Keanu had stepped back from daily operations, dedicating his time to charitable causes around the world. He had trusted his executives to maintain the values he had built into Starlight Entertainment. He communicated through encrypted emails and occasional voice calls, always preferring to listen rather than be seen. Perhaps that had been his mistake. On this particular Thursday morning, Keanu decided to visit the company headquarters without any announcement. He wanted to see how things were truly running, to feel the real pulse of the organization, rather than the polished reports that landed in his inbox every quarter. He didn't call ahead. He didn't arrange for anyone to meet him. He simply showed up the way any owner might check on something they genuinely cared about. The Starlight Entertainment building rose 15 stories into the Los Angeles sky, all glass and steel and modern ambition. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate success with polished marble floors that reflected the morning light and abstract art pieces that cost more than most people earned in several years. Everything about the space was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were entering a place of power and importance. Keanu walked through the gleaming entrance, dressed exactly as he always dressed in his private life. A weathered black motorcycle jacket that had seen countless rides up the Pacific Coast Highway, the kind of jacket that told stories if you looked closely enough. Faded jeans that fit comfortably rather than fashionably. Scuffed boots that had walked countless miles. A gray knit cap pulled low over his hair, partly for warmth, partly out of habit. Over his shoulder hung a canvas messenger bag, worn at the edges and modest in appearance. Most people would assume it contained nothing of importance. They would be wrong. He looked like someone who might work at a record store or teach music lessons on weekends. He looked like a man who fixed motorcycles in his spare time or volunteered at animal shelters. He certainly didn't look like a man who controlled a major film studio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that, of course, was exactly the point. The young receptionist glanced up as he approached the front desk. Her nameplate read Sophie Chen, and she had joined Starlight Entertainment only 6 months ago. Fresh from a communications degree and eager to climb the entertainment industry ladder, she had been trained to handle the constant flow of people who passed through these doors: agents with their confident smiles, actors with their desperate hope masked as casual interest, directors with their artistic intensity, writers clutching scripts like lottery tickets. She had learned quickly that in this business, everyone believed they were special. Her job was to sort the truly important from the merely hopeful, and she had developed a keen eye for the difference. She looked at the man standing before her. There was something vaguely familiar about his face, even half hidden beneath that gray cap. Those thoughtful eyes, that quiet way of standing, as if he had no need to take up more space than necessary. Recognition flickered across her mind like a half-remembered melody. Keanu Reeves, the actor. She had seen his movies when she was younger. Her older brother had been obsessed with those action films, the ones where Keanu moved through impossible situations with calm determination. But that was years ago, wasn't it? A different era entirely. Her initial spark of interest faded quickly into professional assessment. She saw celebrities regularly. This was a film studio. After all, just last week, she had directed a famous director to the executive floor without so much as a flutter in her pulse. She was beyond being starstruck. And besides, she thought, studying him with the cool evaluation she had perfected, when was the last time Keanu Reeves had been in anything significant? She couldn't remember seeing his name attached to any recent blockbuster. No buzz on social media, no premieres covered by entertainment news. He had faded from the spotlight the way so many actors did once their moment passed. Looking at his worn jacket, his old bag, the knit cap that seemed almost out of place in this temple of polished success, Sophie felt her assumption solidify into certainty. This was not a man at the height of his career. This was someone on the decline, probably here hoping to charm his way into a meeting, maybe secure a small role in one of their upcoming productions. She had seen it before former stars who couldn't accept that their time had ended, wandering into studios with hopeful smiles and outdated headshots. It was sad, really, but it wasn't her job to be sentimental. She arranged her face into that particular expression of polite dismissal, the one that conveyed helpfulness while communicating clearly that the person before her was not particularly important. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone efficient and cool. "I'm here to see the executive team," Keanu said quietly. His voice was soft, unhurried, carrying none of the demanding energy she usually heard from industry people trying to project importance. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't." Sophie almost allowed herself a small laugh. No appointment, dressed like that, expecting to walk in and see the executives. This was exactly the kind of optimistic delusion she encountered every week. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice taking on that practiced tone of false sympathy, "but the executive team is in a very important quarterly planning session right now. They absolutely cannot be disturbed. These sessions are critical to the company's direction." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Critical direction words, designed to remind him of his place in the hierarchy of importance. "You're welcome to wait over there," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward a row of hard plastic chairs along the far wall, positioned near the service elevator, away from the main traffic flow, out of sight from the important areas. The kind of seating reserved for delivery people, maintenance workers, and visitors who didn't quite belong. But honestly, she added, lowering her voice as if sharing a helpful secret, it could be a very long wait. These meetings sometimes go on for hours. You might want to come back another time. Or perhaps, call ahead to schedule something proper. Keanu looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he simply nodded. "I'll wait," he said. He walked to the chairs she had indicated and sat down, his old messenger bag resting on his lap. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't pull out a business card or drop names or demand to speak with someone in charge. He simply accepted the seat he had been assigned, like a man who understood that some lessons could only be learned through observation. Sophie watched him go, then turned back to her computer with a small shake of her head. Just another hopeful who would eventually realize he was wasting his time and leave. She had already forgotten him. Minutes passed. The lobby hummed with the busy energy of a successful enterprise. Well-dressed men and women walked past in purposeful strides, their expensive shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. They carried tablets and phones, and the unmistakable air of people who believed their work truly mattered. None of them glanced at the man in the worn jacket sitting quietly by the wall. A group of young executives hurried past, discussing market projections in loud, confident voices. They didn't notice him. A woman in designer heels walked by, speaking rapidly into her phone about a talent negotiation. She didn't see him. An older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit strolled toward the elevator, checking his Patek Philippe. He didn't acknowledge the quiet figure in the waiting area. Keanu watched them all. He noted the expensive watches, the designer bags, the carefully cultivated images of success. He remembered when Starlight Entertainment had been different, when he had walked these halls himself in the early days, talking to everyone from the creative directors to the cleaning staff. He had insisted on a culture where ideas mattered more than appearances, where every person was treated with dignity regardless of their title or their wardrobe. What he was seeing now was something else entirely. About 6 minutes into his wait, a young man emerged from a side corridor. His name was Bradley Morrison, and he had recently been promoted to junior vice president. It was a modest title in the grand hierarchy, but Bradley wore it like a crown bestowed by royalty. His suit was expensive and slightly too tight, chosen for its Italian label rather than its fit. On his wrist gleamed a Rolex that had cost him 4 months of salary, a purchase he considered an essential investment in his professional image. Bradley walked with the confident stride of someone who believed the universe was arranging itself for his inevitable success. He was heading to the artisanal coffee bar when he noticed the man sitting in the waiting area. He recognized the face immediately. Even with the cap and the casual clothes, there was no mistaking those features. Keanu Reeves, the action star from those old movies that played on cable television late at night. But instead of respect, or even curiosity, Bradley felt only a warm surge of superiority. He had heard the whispers in industry circles Keanu Reeves had gone quiet. No major projects in years. No presence at the important parties. No mentions in the trades. He was yesterday's headline, a name that belonged to a different chapter of Hollywood history. And just look at how he was dressed. Bradley's eyes swept over the worn motorcycle jacket, the faded jeans, the old bag, the cap that looked like it had been purchased at a gas station. This was not how successful people presented themselves. This was how people looked when they had given up, when they were desperate, when they had nothing left but hope and a familiar face. Bradley smirked to himself. This was probably some washed-up celebrity hoping to leverage past fame into a present opportunity. Maybe he was here to audition for a supporting role, or worse, to beg for any part at all. How the mighty had fallen. In this business, Bradley knew, you were only as good as your last success, and Keanu Reeves hadn't had a success in a very long time. He walked past without acknowledgement. Not a nod, not a polite smile, not even the basic courtesy one stranger might extend to another. He simply continued to the coffee bar, ordered his usual, and walked back the same way, his eyes fixed on his phone, deliberately not looking at the waiting visitor. Why would he? People who looked like that didn't deserve his attention. Keanu watched him pass. He noted the expensive watch, the self-satisfied stride, the casual arrogance in every movement. He said nothing. His face revealed nothing. But behind those calm eyes, something was being carefully recorded, filed away, understood. From his seat in the waiting area, Keanu had a clear view through the glass walls of the main conference room on the mezzanine level. The architecture of the building had been designed for transparency, for openness, but what Keanu saw through that glass was anything but transparent. Inside sat the men and women who were supposedly running his company. Marcus Webb, the chief executive officer, was leaning back in his leather chair with the casual ease of a king surveying his domain. He was in his late 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, suit impeccably tailored by hands that charged thousands for their work. On his wrist was a watch that cost more than most families earned in 2 years. He was gesturing broadly as he spoke, his hands cutting through the air in expansive movements designed to show off that expensive timepiece as much as to emphasize his points. Next to him sat Diana Holbrook, the chief financial officer. Younger than Marcus by perhaps a decade, but equally polished, equally entitled, she was nodding along to whatever Marcus was saying, occasionally adding comments that made the table laugh with the comfortable ease of inside jokes. On the table before several executives sat crystal glasses of amber liquid, catching the afternoon light. It was barely past 10 in the morning, but apparently the rules about drinking during business hours didn't apply to people at this level. Near the refreshment station hovered a third figure, Victor Ashworth, the chief of staff, whose primary function seemed to be agreeing enthusiastically with everything Marcus and Diana said. He laughed at their jokes half a beat too late. He nodded with excessive energy. He refilled their cups with the attentiveness of a servant rather than a colleague. The perfect portrait of a man who had learned that advancement came from flattery rather than competence. They called this gathering a strategic planning session. The calendar invitation probably used important words like synergy and optimization and forward momentum, but Keanu could see the truth through that glass wall. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't planning. This was three people enjoying the comfortable fruits of positions they hadn't earned, insulated in a bubble of privilege they had built around themselves. Keanu remembered when he had promoted Marcus years ago, when Starlight was still finding its footing. He had seen ambition in Marcus's eyes and mistaken it for dedication. He had seen hunger and assumed it was passion for the work itself. He had trusted him to be a steward of something Keanu cared about, never imagining Marcus would transform himself into a king. The company Keanu had founded on principles of respect, hard work, and treating every person with dignity had been hollowed out from the inside. The executives had created a culture in their own image, a world where status was measured by the cost of your watch, where worth was determined by the brand of your suit, where someone in a worn jacket and old boots was automatically categorized as beneath notice. They had built exactly the kind of environment Keanu had always despised. 14 minutes had now passed since Keanu had sat down. 14 minutes of being ignored while he watched his company operate under a philosophy that was the complete opposite of everything he believed in. No one had come to check on him. No one had offered him a glass of water. No one had apologized for the delay or provided an update on when someone might be available. He had been categorized as unimportant and promptly forgotten, left to sit in his uncomfortable chair like an inconvenience that would eventually tire itself out and leave. For most of those 14 minutes, Keanu had remained still, watching and processing. He was not a man given to quick anger or impulsive decisions. Life had taught him patience. Loss had taught him perspective. He had learned long ago that wisdom came from observing carefully before acting, from understanding fully before judging. But patience was not the same as acceptance, and understanding a problem did not mean tolerating it. He had seen enough. He understood enough. He had decided what needed to happen next. Keanu stood up from the uncomfortable waiting chair. The movement was slow and deliberate, carrying none of the hesitation of someone unsure of their position. His old messenger bag shifted to his shoulder with practiced ease. His eyes, which had been soft and patient moments before, now held something different. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity. The look of a man who had made a calculation and was ready to execute it. He didn't smooth his jacket or adjust his cap. He wasn't trying to look more impressive for what was about to happen. He was simply preparing to walk into a room and change everything. Without a word to Sophie, the receptionist who had dismissed him, without seeking permission from anyone, Keanu began walking toward the elevator bank. His footsteps were steady on the polished marble floor, not fast, not aggressive, simply inevitable. Each step brought him closer to the men and women who had built their comfortable lives on the foundation he had created. The people who had transformed his vision into their personal kingdom, the executives who had no idea that the person they had treated like an irrelevant nuisance was about to become the most important figure in their professional lives. Sophie looked up, startled. "Sir? Sir, you can't just—" But Keanu was already pressing the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself had decided to cooperate. "Sir, I'm calling security." The doors closed on her words. The man in the worn motorcycle jacket and gray cap, carrying nothing but a modest messenger bag and 8 years of patient observation, was about to remind them who really owned everything they thought was theirs. Keanu didn't knock. He simply placed his hand on the heavy oak door of the executive conference room and pushed it wide open. The movement was smooth and unhurried, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had every right to be exactly where he was. The sound of laughter died instantly. Marcus Webb had been leaning back in his leather chair, mouth open mid-sentence, one hand frozen in an expansive gesture. Now he sat motionless, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to the first flickers of anger. Diana Holbrook had snapped her head around at the sound of the door, her eyes going wide. Her hand was still wrapped around her crystal whiskey glass, forgotten entirely. Victor Ashworth, who had been hovering near the refreshment station, startled so violently that he sent a stream of hot coffee spilling across the expensive carpet. He stared at the spreading stain for a moment. Then at the intruder, his face a portrait of bewildered panic. Marcus recovered first. His confusion hardened into outrage as he took in the appearance of the man who had just walked uninvited into their private meeting. The worn motorcycle jacket, the faded jeans, the gray cap, the old messenger bag. Everything about this person screamed that he didn't belong here. He rose from his chair, his face reddening with indignation. "Who the hell let you in here?" Marcus demanded, his voice dropping to a low, tight growl. "This is a private executive session. Security is supposed to vet every outsider." He turned to Victor. "Ashworth, who is this man?" Victor could only stammer. I don't know, sir. I'll call security immediately." Diana had risen from her seat as well, studying the intruder with narrowed eyes. Unlike Marcus, she had recognized the face beneath the cap. "Wait," Diana said, holding up a hand. "I know who this is." She stepped closer, looking Keanu up and down with undisguised disdain. Keanu Reeves, the actor. Or should I say, former actor. A small, cruel smile played at the corners of her mouth. "If you're here looking for work, Mr. Reeves, this isn't how it's done. We're not producing anything that would suit someone of your vintage." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at Keanu again, reassessing. Yes, he could see it now. The face was familiar, though aged and partially hidden. Keanu Reeves. Someone who had been famous once, before the world moved on. But recognition brought no respect. What was a washed-up actor doing here, interrupting their meeting? "I suggest you leave now," Marcus said, settling back into his chair with exaggerated calm. "Ashworth, call security and have him escorted out." Through all of this, Keanu hadn't said a single word. He stood just inside the doorway, perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. He didn't defend himself against their insults. He didn't argue or explain. Instead, his eyes were fixed on something at the far end of the conference table, the chair at the head of the table. His chair, the one he had sat in years ago when Starlight Entertainment was just a dream being built into reality. Without acknowledging the executives or their threats, Keanu began to walk. His footsteps were measured and deliberate, each one landing with a soft, certain sound. He moved past the startled faces of people who couldn't understand what was happening, heading directly toward that chair. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus sputtered, rising again. "Ashworth, call security now." "Stop right there," Diana commanded, stepping forward to block Keanu's path. "You need to leave immediately before we have you arrested for trespassing." Keanu stopped walking. He was perhaps 10 feet from the head of the table, standing calmly while the increasingly agitated executives surrounded him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed the gray cap from his head. With the hat gone, his face was fully visible for the first time. The familiar features, the thoughtful eyes, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical power. He folded the cap and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he reached into his worn messenger bag and withdrew a folder. It was plain manila, unremarkable, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. But what it contained was anything but ordinary. Keanu placed the folder on the polished table and slid it gently toward Marcus Webb. Marcus looked down at it. His hand reached out and picked it up. The room went completely silent. His eyes scanned the documents inside corporate papers, shareholder agreements, board resolutions. And at the top of the stack, an identification card bearing Keanu's photograph and the designation KR, majority shareholder, 51%. The color drained from Marcus Webb's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand began to shake. Diana snatched the folder from Marcus's trembling fingers. She stared at it, reading the information once, twice, 3 times. "KR," Diana muttered, her voice hollow. The majority shareholder we've only communicated with through encrypted emails for 8 years. That's you. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply walked the remaining distance to the head of the table and lowered himself into the chair that had been designed for him. The leather creaked softly as he settled into place, a sound that echoed through the silent room like a gavel falling. He had reclaimed his seat. The executives stood frozen, their faces portraits of dawning horror. Marcus looked like a man watching his world collapse. Diana's arrogance had crumbled into something resembling fear. Victor had forgotten about his phone entirely. Then Keanu spoke. His voice was not loud. He didn't shout or rage. He simply spoke in a calm, measured tone that carried more weight than any amount of screaming. 14 minutes, he said. I sat in that lobby for 14 minutes. He let the words settle. I am the co-founder of this company, the majority shareholder controlling 51% of Starlight Entertainment. And because I walked in wearing an old jacket instead of a designer suit, I was treated like garbage, told to wait in a corner like a homeless person hoping for spare change. Marcus finally found his voice, cracked and desperate. Mr. Reeves, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. Please, we can explain everything. No, Keanu said. And though his voice remained soft, the word cut through Marcus's stammering like a blade. There is nothing to explain. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting flat on the table. This was not a failure of your receptionist. She was following the culture you created. She treated me exactly how she's been trained to treat people who don't look wealthy enough to matter. The young executive who walked past me in the lobby, he looked right at me and decided I wasn't worth acknowledging. He learned that attitude from you. Keanu's gaze moved across their faces. You have built a culture in my company where human beings are judged by the price of their clothing, where respect is determined by the brand of watch on someone's wrist, where a person in a worn jacket is automatically assumed to be worthless. Diana attempted to regain her composure. With all due respect, you've been absent for 8 years. We've managed the operations, grown the revenue. A misunderstanding at reception doesn't negate years of leadership. Keanu regarded her with an expression that was almost sad. Leadership, he repeated. Sitting in this room drinking whiskey before noon while your employees work. Building a culture where people are afraid to speak up. Creating an environment where the quality of someone's shoes matters more than the quality of their ideas. He shook his head slowly. That is not leadership, Miss Holbrook. That is entitlement. Marcus made one last attempt, his voice pleading. Keanu, please, we can change protocols. Retrain staff. There's no need for anything drastic. Keanu looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried absolute finality. You had 8 years to maintain the culture of respect I built into this company. Instead, you built a kingdom for yourselves and forgot that every person who walks through those doors deserves basic human dignity. His eyes locked onto Marcus's, and that is why you no longer work here. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. You no longer work here. For a moment, no one moved. The executives stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. One moment they had been laughing, drinking whiskey, enjoying their comfortable positions of power. The next, a man in a worn motorcycle jacket had walked in and dismantled their entire world with 5 simple words. Marcus Webb was the first to break. This is insane, he shouted, slamming his palm on the conference table with enough force to rattle the crystal glasses. You cannot fire us because of a misunderstanding at reception. We have contracts. We have rights. We have lawyers who will tear you apart in court. His face had gone from pale shock back to crimson rage. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but anger was easier to access. Anger felt like power, even when all power had been stripped away. Diana Holbrook found her voice as well, though it came out higher and tighter than her usual smooth tone. You've been absent for 8 years, Diana spat, jabbing a finger toward Keanu. 8 years! We're the ones who kept this company running. We managed the operations. We grew the revenue. We maintained the relationships. You can't just waltz in here and destroy everything because someone asked you to wait a few minutes." Victor Ashworth said nothing. He had collapsed into one of the side chairs, his face the color of old paper, his coffee-stained hands trembling in his lap. Keanu listened to their outbursts without expression. He let them rage, let them threaten, let them convince themselves that volume and indignation might somehow reverse what was happening. When they finally ran out of breath, he reached into his messenger bag once more. From inside, he withdrew another folder, this one thicker, filled with highlighted passages and annotated margins. Simple, unremarkable, the kind of folder that might contain anything or nothing. But this folder contained everything. Keanu placed it on the polished surface and opened it to the first page. Clause 9.4, he read, his voice clear and measured. Shareholder Agreement, 2017. He paused, letting the date sink in. This was not some improvised accusation. This was a document that had been in place for years, waiting for exactly this moment. The majority shareholder holding over 50% of company shares retains the right to immediate termination of any executive officer upon material evidence of gross negligence, ethical violations, or systemic failure to maintain the operational integrity of the company. Keanu looked up from the document, his eyes moving across the three people who stood before him in various states of distress. Your collective failure to recognize the individual who controls this company, combined with your decision to treat that individual with contempt based solely on his appearance, constitutes material evidence of a catastrophic failure in judgment at the highest leadership level. Marcus's face contorted. That's not material evidence. That's your bruised ego looking for legal cover. I wasn't finished, Keanu said quietly, and something in his tone made Marcus's mouth snap shut. Keanu turned to the next page in the folder. In addition to today's events, I have documentation here regarding the transfer of $6.2 million from the production budget into an account labeled Strategic Development Initiatives over the past 24 months. This account has been used for purposes that have nothing to do with company operations. He looked directly at Diana Holbrook. Private jet charters, luxury resort stays, personal vehicle purchases, a $340,000 renovation of a private residence. His gaze shifted to Marcus. Your residence, I believe. Marcus's face went gray. Diana was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned white. This, Keanu continued, constitutes evidence of breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of company funds. According to the clause I just read, it gives me the right to terminate your employment immediately. No advance notice required. No board vote necessary. But he wasn't finished. And there's something else. He turned to another section of the folder, and his voice grew colder. My investigators discovered that you've been in secret negotiations with Titan Media Group for the past 10 months. The plan, as I understand it, was to strip Starlight's most valuable assets, our film library, our distribution contracts, our intellectual property, and transfer them to a new entity controlled by Titan. In exchange, you would receive substantial personal payouts and executive positions at the new company. The room had gone absolutely still. The remaining shell of Starlight Entertainment would be left to collapse. Bankruptcy within 18 months, according to the projections I've seen. And the 847 people who work here, the editors, the assistants, the technicians, the security guards, the people who actually make this company function, they would lose their jobs, their health insurance, their livelihoods. Keanu closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent room. You were planning to sacrifice 847 families so that you could get richer. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the accusation pressed down on the room like a physical force. Keanu stood, Marcus Webb, Diana Holbrook, Victor Ashworth, and all executives who report directly to you. Your employment with Starlight Entertainment is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building within the hour. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked. You can't do this! Diana's composure finally cracked completely. We have contracts. We have rights. Our lawyers will— Your lawyers, Keanu interrupted calmly. Will advise you to accept the severance terms I'm offering and be grateful you're not facing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. He pressed a single button. "Rebecca," he said calmly, "I need you and your team at the executive conference room. We have a termination to process." Less than 2 minutes later, the door opened. Rebecca Thornton entered first, a woman in her early 50s with silver hair pulled back in a precise bun and eyes that missed nothing. She was Keanu's personal attorney, and she had built a reputation in legal circles for being as efficient as she was thorough. Behind her came 3 security personnel in dark uniforms. Rebecca surveyed the scene with a single glance, taking in the shell-shocked executives and the calm figure seated at the head of the table. Her expression revealed no surprise. She had been prepared for this possibility. Collect all electronic devices, access cards, and company property, Keanu instructed, without looking at the terminated executives. Their security clearances have already been revoked. Their email accounts are locked. Escort them to their vehicles and ensure they take nothing that belongs to Starlight Entertainment. Marcus made one last desperate attempt. "You'll regret this, Reeves," he shouted as the security personnel moved toward him. "You have no idea how to run this company. Without us, Starlight will collapse within a month. We are the ones who know how everything works." Keanu turned to face him. His expression held no anger, no satisfaction, nothing but a cold disappointment that was somehow worse than rage. "This company existed before you," Keanu said quietly. "It will exist long after you're gone. The only difference is that it will no longer be run by people who judge human worth by the price of a watch." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the security guards had already taken hold of his arms. Whatever he wanted to say died in his throat as he was guided firmly toward the door. Diana followed without resistance, her earlier bravado completely shattered. Victor had to be helped to his feet, his legs apparently unwilling to support him. They were led out of the boardroom, down the hallway, past the reception desk where this had all begun. Sophie watched them go with wide eyes, understanding flooding her face as she realized the connection between the man she had dismissed and the executives now being escorted from the building. The laughter that had filled this room just 20 minutes ago had been replaced by the heavy shuffle of feet walking toward the end of their careers. Keanu remained standing at the head of the conference table, watching the now empty doorway. The expensive cologne that Marcus favored still lingered in the air. The crystal whiskey glasses still sat where they had been abandoned, amber liquid catching the afternoon light. Rebecca was already on her phone, coordinating the systematic lockdown of all accounts and systems associated with the terminated executives. Her voice was calm and professional, handling the destruction of 3 careers with the same efficiency she might use to order lunch. The door opened again, softly this time. Keanu turned, expecting perhaps another security guard with a question. Instead, he saw a woman he didn't immediately recognize. She was in her mid-30s, with curly brown hair and glasses that kept slipping down her nose. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, no designer labels, no expensive jewelry. In her hands, she clutched a tablet computer like a shield. Her expression was nervous but determined, the look of someone who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. "Mr. Reeves?" the woman asked, her voice quiet but steady. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Priya Sharma. I'm the head of IT security for Starlight Entertainment." Keanu studied her for a moment. The name was familiar. He remembered it from the technical reports he had reviewed over the years. Detailed documents about system infrastructure and data security. Priya Sharma had been with the company for 11 years. She had built most of the digital architecture from scratch. "I need to speak with you," Priya continued, "before the news spreads, before they have a chance to cover their tracks." Keanu nodded slowly. "I'm listening." Priya stepped further into the room, glancing at Rebecca as if unsure whether to continue with her present. Keanu gave a small nod of reassurance. "What you did today? Firing Marcus and Diana?" Priya began, her words coming faster now. "You made the right decision, but you don't know how right you were. You don't know what they were really planning." She paused, gathering herself. I'm the one who sent you the anonymous tip 4 months ago. Keanu's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. I discovered the irregularities by accident, Priya continued. Encrypted files being sent to external servers. Video conferences with participants I didn't recognize, held on secured channels that bypassed normal company oversight. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the more I looked, the worse it got. She opened her tablet and began scrolling through files. I documented everything. Every transaction, every secret meeting, every piece of evidence I could find. I stored it all, encrypted and hidden, waiting for a chance to use it. Why didn't you report this through official channels? Keanu asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Priya lowered her head. I tried, Mr. Reeves. 6 months ago, I submitted a report to Marcus through internal audit. I documented everything I had found. I thought. He would want to know. I thought there might be an innocent explanation. She laughed bitterly. A week later, Marcus called me into his office. He looked at me and said, "If you continue involving yourself in matters above your pay grade, you'll be the first one let go when we restructure." He made it very clear what would happen to my career if I didn't drop it. Her voice grew quieter. I have 2 children, Mr. Reeves. A mortgage. A husband who works part-time so he can be home when the kids get out of school. I couldn't afford to lose this job. I couldn't risk my family's security. She straightened, meeting Keanu's eyes again. But I also couldn't watch them destroy everything. So I kept quiet publicly. But privately, I documented everything. And when I found your encrypted contact information buried in the original corporate files, I took a chance. Waiting for today, Keanu said softly. I didn't know today would happen, Priya admitted. But when I heard the commotion, when I saw them being escorted out, I knew this might be my only opportunity. I had to take it. Keanu rose from his chair and walked slowly around the table toward her. She tensed slightly, uncertain what to expect. Keanu stopped in front of her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You saved this company, he said quietly. Not me. I fired them because they disrespected someone they thought was unimportant. You're the one who discovered they were planning to destroy everything. He paused, letting the words settle. You risked your career, your family's security, to protect 847 people who will never know what you did for them. That's integrity. Priya. That's the kind of character that those people in their expensive suits will never understand. Priya blinked rapidly, her eyes suddenly bright with emotion she was struggling to contain. Keanu turned to Rebecca, who had been listening to the entire exchange. Add corporate conspiracy and breach of fiduciary duty to the file, he instructed. I want a complete audit of every transaction connected to Marcus and Diana, everything they touched for the past 3 years. He looked back at Priya, and effective immediately, Priya Sharma is the acting chief technology officer of Starlight Entertainment. Priya stared at him, stunned into silence. I don't know what to say, Mr. Reeves. Don't say anything, Keanu replied. Go secure our systems. Make sure Marcus and Diana can't access anything remotely, can't delete anything, can't sabotage anything on their way out. He placed his hand on her shoulder once more. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm going to need people I can trust. Priya nodded, a new resolve settling over her features. She turned and headed for the door with purpose in her stride that hadn't been there when she entered. Keanu watched her go, then turned to look out the window at the Los Angeles skyline. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb and Diana Holbrook were being driven away from the building they had treated as their personal kingdom. They had walked in this morning believing they were untouchable. They were leaving with nothing. But this wasn't over. The executives had been removed, but the damage they had done to the company's culture ran deeper than any single termination could fix. The employees who had learned to judge people by their clothing, the systems that rewarded arrogance over integrity, the atmosphere of entitlement that had infected every level of the organization. All of it needed to change. And the 847 people who worked at Starlight Entertainment, the people Marcus and Diana had been willing to sacrifice for their own enrichment, they deserved to know the truth. They deserved to know that their jobs were safe. They deserved to understand what kind of company Starlight was going to become. The news spread like wildfire. Within an hour of Marcus Webb and Diana Holbrook being escorted from the building, headlines were everywhere. Rumors swirled through the company like a storm. Employees gathered in anxious clusters, whispering, checking phones, wondering if they should start updating their resumes. No one knew what came next. The uncertainty was suffocating. Keanu understood this. The 847 people who worked at Starlight Entertainment couldn't wait. They needed answers now. "I need to speak to everyone," he told Rebecca. "All employees. Right now, I'll be in the main atrium in 5 minutes." He took the stairs rather than the elevator, descending through the building he had helped create. The main atrium was an impressive space at the heart of Starlight Entertainment, a soaring open area where all 15 floors connected through balconies and walkways. Natural light poured in through a massive skylight above. By the time Keanu reached the ground floor, hundreds of employees had gathered. They lined the balconies. They crowded the ground level. They pressed against railings, craning their necks to see. Keanu walked to the center of the atrium. He didn't climb onto a stage or stand behind a podium. He simply stopped in the middle of the open floor, surrounded by the people he was about to address. His worn motorcycle jacket, his faded jeans, his comfortable boots, he looked like anyone who might have wandered in off the street. The murmuring faded as employees realized he was about to speak. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him. The silence was raw and anxious. Keanu didn't use a microphone. His voice carried naturally through the open space. "You've heard the news," he began simply. "You've seen the commotion. You're scared. I understand." He paused, making eye contact with as many faces as possible. Marcus Webb, Diana Holbrook, and every executive who reported directly to them are no longer employed by this company. They were terminated today, effective immediately. A ripple of whispers. Keanu waited for it to subside. They were not fired because they failed to recognize me. They were fired because of how they treated someone they believed was unimportant. Someone they decided wasn't worth basic human courtesy. He took a breath. "This morning, I walked into this building wearing the same clothes I wear every day. No suit, no expensive watch. Because of how I was dressed, I was told to wait in the corner like a delivery person. When I entered the boardroom, I was insulted and told to leave." His expression grew thoughtful, almost vulnerable. "Some of you might wonder why I dress this way. Why someone in my position doesn't wear designer suits and expensive accessories. Let me explain." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I haven't always been successful. There were years when I had nothing. Years when I slept on friends' couches, wondering if I would ever get my next role. Years when I couldn't afford a decent meal, let alone fancy clothes." His voice softened. "And then, even after success came, life reminded me that material things mean nothing. I've experienced loss that money could never fix. I've buried people I loved. I've sat alone in empty houses that were full of expensive things but completely devoid of what actually matters." The atrium had gone completely silent. Every person seemed to lean in closer. "I choose to dress simply, not because I can't afford better. I choose it because I never want to forget what it feels like to have nothing. I never want to become someone who looks at a person in worn clothes and assumes they're worthless. Because I was that person once. And the people who showed me kindness during those years, they didn't care what I was wearing. They saw me as a human being." He let those words settle before continuing. "What happened to me this morning was not about my wounded pride. It was a symptom of a culture that has been allowed to grow inside this company. A culture where people are judged by the price of their clothing, where respect is given based on job titles and designer labels, where anyone who doesn't look wealthy enough is automatically dismissed." Keanu swept his gaze across the assembled employees. "I built Starlight Entertainment on different principles. We believed that great ideas could come from anyone, that every person deserved dignity, regardless of their position or appearance. While I was absent, those values were lost, replaced by arrogance and a toxic hierarchy that measured human worth by the brand of watch on your wrist." His voice grew warmer. I want to tell you a story. Years ago, when I was just starting out, there was a janitor at a studio where I was filming. His name was George. Every night after everyone left, George stayed behind to clean. Nobody noticed him. He was invisible. Employees leaned forward, drawn into the narrative. One night, I stayed late to practice my lines. George came in to clean, and we started talking. He told me he used to be a sound engineer until an accident and medical bills took everything. The janitorial job was how he supported his orphaned granddaughter. Keanu smiled at the memory. That night, George mentioned something about repositioning some equipment to improve the acoustics. I mentioned it to the director the next day. George's suggestion saved the production 2 days of shooting and tens of thousands of dollars. One simple idea from a man everyone had decided was nobody important. He looked out at the crowd with quiet intensity. Great ideas don't come from expensive boardroom chairs. The most valuable contributions often come from people others overlook. The grip who notices a safety hazard. The assistant who suggests a better schedule. The security guard who treats every visitor with respect because she understands you never know who might walk through that door. His voice rose slightly. Every person in this building deserves to be treated with dignity. Not because of what they might do for you, not because they might turn out to be important, but because they are human beings, and that alone makes them worthy of respect. He paused, and his expression hardened. But I haven't told you the worst part. The disrespect I experienced was not the only reason those executives were fired. The crowd tensed. Marcus Webb and Diana Holbrook were secretly negotiating to sell off Starlight Entertainment, not to help it grow, to strip it. They planned to transfer our most valuable assets to an outside corporation, pocket millions in personal payoffs, and leave the company to collapse. Gasps echoed through the atrium. Under their plan, Starlight would have declared bankruptcy within 18 months. More than 847 jobs eliminated, 847 families without income. Also, 2 people could get richer. Keanu raised his hand as angry murmurs swelled. That plan has been stopped. Your jobs are safe. Starlight Entertainment is not being sold, not being stripped, not being destroyed. A wave of relief swept through the crowd. Some employees embraced. Others simply closed their eyes, releasing hours of tension. But survival is not enough, Keanu continued. I want to rebuild this company on the values it was supposed to represent. He straightened. Starting today, there will be no rigid dress code at Starlight Entertainment. You will be evaluated on your ideas, your dedication, your integrity, and the way you treat your colleagues, especially those others might overlook. He gestured toward Priya Sharma, who was standing at the edge of the crowd. Priya Sharma discovered the conspiracy that threatened to destroy this company. She risked her career and her family's security to document what was happening, even when she was threatened. Starting today, Priya is the acting chief technology officer of Starlight Entertainment. Applause erupted, genuine and spontaneous. This is how we will operate now. Integrity will be rewarded. Courage recognized. And every person who walks through our doors will be treated with respect, whether they arrive in a limousine or on a bus, whether they wear a designer suit or a jacket that's seen better days. Keanu took one more look around the atrium. I'm not just coming back to save Starlight Entertainment, I'm coming back to rebuild the culture I should never have let slip away. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Then the atrium exploded with applause. It wasn't polite corporate clapping. This was raw and real, the sound of hundreds of people releasing fear and replacing it with hope. Some cheered, others wiped away tears. Keanu didn't retreat to an executive floor. He stepped into the crowd, shaking hands, listening to anyone who wanted to speak. A young woman from the design department approached him, her eyes red. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. Last year, I was passed over for a promotion because one of the executives said I didn't present professionally enough. I couldn't afford the clothes they expected. I've felt invisible here ever since." An older man from facilities management stepped forward. "Same thing happened to me," he said. "I've worked here for 12 years, but because I wear a maintenance uniform, some executives wouldn't even look at me in the elevator. Like I wasn't there. A security guard nodded. I've seen it every day. People treated differently based on what they're wearing. The expensive suits get smiles and handshakes. The rest of us get ignored. Keanu listened to each of them, his expression growing more determined with every story. That ends today, he said firmly. I promise you that ends today. 3 weeks had passed since the terminations. 3 weeks of media attention, stock market fluctuations, and endless speculation about the future of Starlight Entertainment. 3 weeks for the dust to settle, and for the full scope of what had happened to become clear. Rebecca Thornton walked into Keanu's office carrying a thick folder. She placed it on his desk with the quiet precision of someone delivering a verdict. We've completed the investigation, she said. It's worse than we initially thought. Keanu looked up from the window where he had been watching the Los Angeles skyline. Marcus and Diana signed a preliminary agreement with Titan Media Group 3 months ago, Rebecca continued. They violated their fiduciary duties, deceived shareholders, and deliberately concealed material financial information. With the evidence we have, we can pursue civil litigation. They would be liable for damages between $10 and $15 million. She paused. Additionally, if we forward this file to federal authorities, they could face criminal charges for securities fraud. We're talking potential prison time. Keanu picked up the folder and leafed through the pages, slowly bank statements, email transcripts, meeting minutes from secret negotiations. The paper trail of betrayal, documented in meticulous detail. He set the folder down and turned back to the window. Rebecca, he said, after a long moment, I want to propose a different approach. She raised an eyebrow. Different how? Invite Marcus and Diana to a meeting. No lawyers on their side. Just them, you, and me. I want to speak with them directly. Rebecca hesitated. Are you certain? This could be used against us later if things go to court. I'm certain. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb and Diana Holbrook walked into the Starlight Entertainment conference room for the second time in a month. But everything had changed. Gone were the expensive suits and the air of entitled confidence. Marcus wore a simple blazer that looked like it had been pulled hastily from the back of a closet. Diana's appearance was subdued, and dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept well in weeks. They looked like people who had spent every waking hour imagining the worst possible outcomes, because that was exactly what they had been doing. Keanu sat at the head of the table in the same chair where he had delivered their termination. He wore the same worn motorcycle jacket, the same simple clothes. He didn't stand when they entered. Sit down, he said. They sat. Marcus tried to maintain a stoic expression, but his hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. Diana couldn't bring herself to make eye contact. I'll be direct, Keanu began. My attorney has informed you of what we're legally entitled to pursue. Civil litigation for $10 to $15 million in damages. Criminal referral to the FBI for securities fraud. Your careers would be finished permanently. You might spend years in prison. Marcus swallowed hard. Diana stared at the table surface as if hoping it might open up and swallow her. But I don't want to do that. Both of them looked up, startled. Confusion mixed with desperate hope flickered in their eyes. Not because I forgive you, Keanu continued, his voice calm but firm. You betrayed my trust. You conspired to destroy the livelihoods of 847 people. You built a toxic culture that judged human beings by the price of their clothing. I don't forgive any of that. He let the words sink in before continuing. But I've learned something over the years. Punishment isn't always the best answer. Sometimes creating an opportunity for people to make things right does more good than making them suffer. Keanu placed a document on the table and slid it toward them. This is a settlement agreement. If you sign it, we won't pursue civil litigation, and we won't forward anything to federal authorities. In exchange, you agree to 3 conditions. Marcus stared at the document like it might bite him. First, Keanu said, you will issue a public apology. Not to me, to the employees of Starlight Entertainment. The people whose lives you were willing to destroy for your own enrichment. He held up a second finger. Second, you will donate $3 million to the Los Angeles Housing Foundation. This money will come from the bonuses you've received over the past several years. It will provide shelter for thousands of people who are struggling, people who society often overlooks. People like the ones you looked right through when you decided they weren't worth your attention. Marcus's face had gone pale. Diana looked like she might be sick. Third, Keanu continued, you will each complete 300 hours of volunteer service at homeless shelters and food kitchens throughout the city. Not for publicity, not for photo opportunities. You will serve meals, clean floors, and look into the eyes of people you would have walked past without a second glance. He leaned forward slightly. You will do this because you need to understand something that your expensive educations and corner offices never taught you. Every human being has value. Every person deserves dignity. It doesn't matter what they're wearing or what they can do for you. His eyes met theirs directly. That's the lesson you failed to learn. And this is your chance to learn it. The room fell silent. Diana finally spoke, her voice cracking. And if we refuse? Rebecca answered before Keanu could. Then we proceed with full legal action. And I promise you, with the evidence we have, you will lose far more than $3 million. You will lose everything. Marcus looked at Diana. Diana looked at the document. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Marcus picked up the pen and signed his name. Diana signed immediately after. Keanu stood. You can go. The two former executives rose, moving toward the door like sleepwalkers. Marcus paused at the threshold, turning back as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. He simply nodded once, a gesture that might have been gratitude or shame or both, and then they were gone. When the door closed, Rebecca turned to Keanu. Are you sure about this? They deserved worse. Keanu smiled slightly, the gentle expression that those who knew him recognized as rare and genuine. Maybe. But $3 million will provide shelter for thousands of homeless people. 300 hours at a food kitchen might actually change how they see the world. And a public apology will remind everyone that arrogance always comes with a price. He looked out the window at the city stretching toward the horizon. Punishment would only hurt them. This might actually help them change. And it will definitely help the people who need it most. In the months that followed, Keanu didn't disappear back into the shadows as he had done 8 years before. He stayed not as a distant investor, monitoring quarterly reports, but as an active leader walking the halls of the company he had built. He established the Open Door Initiative, a program designed to give opportunities to people who had been overlooked by traditional hiring practices. Former inmates working to rebuild their lives. Homeless individuals transitioning back into the workforce. Young people from underserved communities who had never had access to the entertainment industry. They were trained, mentored, and given the chance to prove themselves based on their abilities rather than their backgrounds. He changed the hiring process entirely. No photographs required on applications. First-round interviews conducted blind, where recruiters could only hear candidates' voices and evaluate their ideas without seeing their faces or their clothes. Merit became the only measure that mattered. Once a month, Keanu spent an entire day working alongside different departments. One month, he sat with the security team, learning their routines and hearing their concerns. Another month, he helped the facilities crew with maintenance tasks. He ate lunch in the cafeteria with entry-level employees, asked questions, and genuinely listened to the answers. He wanted to understand Starlight Entertainment from the ground up, not from the sanitized perspective of executive summaries. Priya Sharma was officially promoted to Chief Technology Officer, the word acting finally removed from her title. She became a symbol of what Starlight Entertainment now valued: integrity and courage, recognized and rewarded regardless of previous position. 1 year after the events of that extraordinary day, Starlight Entertainment announced its newest project, a documentary film about social inequality and the prejudices people face based on their appearance. The film would explore how society makes snap judgments about worth and value based on clothing, addresses, and other superficial markers. It would tell the stories of people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated simply because they didn't fit the image of success. Keanu wasn't just the executive producer. He had agreed to appear in the film, playing a small role as a homeless man that others walk past without seeing. The premiere was held at a historic Los Angeles theater. The guest list was unlike any Hollywood event. Alongside industry executives in designer suits were volunteers from the Open Door Initiative, shelter workers, and formerly homeless individuals who had found their way to stability. They sat side by side, equals in the audience, distinguished only by their shared humanity. After the screening, during the press reception, a journalist approached Keanu with a question that had been circulating since the story first broke. "Mr. Reeves, do you have any regrets about firing your entire executive team because they made you wait a few minutes?" Keanu considered the question carefully before responding. "I didn't fire them because they failed to recognize me," he said. "I fired them because of how they treated someone they thought didn't matter, someone they assumed had nothing to offer them, someone they decided wasn't worth basic human courtesy based solely on appearance." He paused, choosing his next words with care. That's the true measure of a person's character. Not how they treat people with power, not how they behave when they think someone important is watching, but how they treat the people they believe are beneath them, the ones they think they'll never need, the ones they assume don't count. Keanu looked out at the crowd, where guests in expensive suits mingled with people in modest clothing, all sharing the same space, the same conversation, the same moment. Real power isn't about titles or appearances. Real power is using whatever position you have to lift others up, especially the people that society tends to forget. In a quiet corner of the reception hall, a man stood alone, watching the proceedings with an expression that was difficult to read. Marcus Webb had completed his 300 hours of volunteer service 3 weeks earlier. He had served thousands of meals. He had cleaned countless floors. He had looked into the eyes of people he once would have dismissed without a thought, and something inside him had shifted in ways he was still trying to understand. He hadn't come to the premiere seeking attention or redemption. He had come because he needed to see what Keanu had built, what Starlight Entertainment had become, what he himself had almost destroyed. When Keanu finished speaking, Marcus joined the applause. It was soft, almost tentative. The applause of a man who understood that he was witnessing something meaningful, something he had nearly prevented from ever existing. No one recognized him. No one approached him. And perhaps that was exactly as it should be. 1 year after the day that changed everything, Sophie Chen stood at the reception desk of Starlight Entertainment. She had been offered the chance to leave. Keanu had made it clear that no one would face consequences for behaviors learned under the old regime, but she had chosen to stay, chosen to be part of building something better. The lobby had changed. The uncomfortable plastic chairs had been replaced with cushioned seating. The cold marble had been warmed with plants and colorful artwork. Student films played on screens in the waiting area. It felt less like a temple of corporate power and more like a place where humans might actually want to spend time. The door swung open, and an elderly man walked in. He was perhaps 75, wearing a worn cardigan and carrying a manuscript in a tattered folder. His shoes were practical sneakers, scuffed from years of use. Everything about him said he had no money, no connections, no reason to be taken seriously. Sophie smiled a genuine smile, warm and welcoming. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome to Starlight Entertainment. How can I help you today?" The man hesitated, clearly surprised by the warmth of the greeting. I have a screenplay," he said. "I know you probably get hundreds of these, and I'm nobody special, but I've been working on this story for 40 years, and I thought maybe." "Of course." Sophie came around the desk and gestured toward the comfortable seating area. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you some coffee? Water? Let me call someone from our development team. They'll want to hear about your project." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Just like that? You don't need to. I don't have an appointment, or you don't need an appointment to be treated with respect," Sophie said gently. "That's how we do things here." She guided him to a comfortable chair and went to make the call. As she did, she noticed Keanu Reeves walking through the lobby in his usual weathered jacket, heading toward the elevator. He paused by the seating area, noticed the elderly man with his manuscript, and stopped. "Is this a screenplay?" Keanu asked, his voice soft and genuinely curious. The man looked up at him at his old jacket, his simple clothes, his kind eyes, and saw not a famous person or a powerful executive, but simply a human being interested in his work. "Yes," he said, "it's about my father. He was an immigrant who came to this country with nothing and built a life through sheer determination. I've been trying to tell his story for 40 years. Keanu sat down in the chair beside him. "Tell me about him," he said. And he did. The measure of a person is not how they treat the powerful, but how they treat those they believe are powerless. What do you think? Was Keanu right to offer them a second chance? Comment below. Subscribe for more stories that inspire.